In every story we tell about AI, book, movie, science, or economy, we imagine AI as this self-contained entity fully capable of interacting with us and similar entities like we humans do. We do this because we project. Artificial intelligence is not a problem we need to solve. It's a quest. We are building AI in our own image, to be like us, better in some ways but fundamentally human at the core, so the concept of AI agents or agentic AI is not a big leap. It's almost inevitable. But this state only exists in our imagination, for we humans possess something vital to interaction that AI doesn't have: identity. There are many misconceptions in cybersecurity, but if I were to pick the biggest one, it would be identity. We talk about identity and access management without realizing that today's technology doesn't actually have an identity framework. What we think of as identities in digital space are in fact superficial forms of referencing, which I will collectively call credentials, and which have in fact nothing to do with identity. The very concept of an identity provider is a misnomer. Think about it. How could anyone provide you with an identity? Your identity is an infinitely rich set of information comprising your thoughts, your experiences, genetic makeup, physical properties, possessions, deeds, intentions, all locked inside your body in a way that no other entity in the world could ever experience. It's a phenomenon manifesting from inside out, not from outside in. Therefore, the only provider of your identity is you. When a third party creates a formalism to register aspects of your identity under a reference like a state-issued ID, the result is an identifier, a proof of your identity in a certain jurisdiction, not the identity itself. This has deep implications, but for now, let's just highlight that identities and identity descriptors like IDs are about you, the agent. By analogy, if we were to give AI identity, this identity must be an artifact describing the AI. Notice how language compels specificity. Not AI conceptually, the AI, an agent distinct from any other. That is the essence of identity. But before I dive into how identity can come about in digital space, let's talk about why this matters now and tackle the question already on your mind: why do we need an identity framework when billions of people have been authenticating online for over 2 decades? The internet industry loves creating buzzwords to anchor abstract digital space phenomena to real-world phenomena that are more relatable. The danger is that such associations are often done under incompatible conditions, leading to widespread confusion about the meaning of the word itself. Such is the case with identity and authentication, which in digital space is the process of validating access credentials, the mirror opposite concept to identity. The best way to understand why credentials are so different is to imagine an online account as a real-world post office box. The domain pobox.com would be analogous to the street address of the post office. Your username would be equivalent with the number on the box you rent. It is the reference to the box. And because anybody could otherwise wander into the post office and randomly check PO boxes, they're locked with a key, which is equivalent to your password. Notice how the items you need to access the content of this PO box, the access credential or credential for short, consist solely of artifacts describing the box, the street address of the post office, the number on the box, and the key. To put this back into context, the fundamental difference between an identity and a credential is that the identity represents you, the agent, whereas the credential represents the point of service, two opposite ends of the interaction. Based on this categorization, access control, the process of deciding and giving access to the content of the PO box, can be done in 2 ways. Authenticating the credentials when the key turns in the lock, confirming, or not, that it's the right key for the right box in the right post office, or identifying the owner, in which case an officer would check your ID, then verify the register to know which box you rent, if any. For added security, like in the case of a safety deposit box in a bank's vault, these methods can be layered, but from a methodology perspective, they remain distinct. In case of identification, access control is based on information about the agent, whereas with authentication, access control is decided based on information about the point of service. In isolation, both methods can be effective, but when we start chaining events, the difference becomes enormous. Identification validates the agent, generating evidence about the entity accessing the box. This is called non-repudiation. In other words, you cannot deny you did it. Authentication, on the other hand, creates evidence only about which box was opened. This makes authentication fully repudiable, meaning it is impossible to prove you were there even if you wanted to. In a socio-dynamic context, identification and authentication have the opposite effects. Identity naturally creates trust, contrary to credentials, which inevitably breaks the chain of trust. Human interaction relies almost exclusively on identification, which continuously builds a web of trust on which modern society is built. None of this inherently exists in cyberspace because digital supply chains rely exclusively on authentication, which provides no information about the agent. The dynamics of trust merits its own dedicated discussion, so I won't get into details, but long story short is that our society cannot exist without trust. As authentication cannot naturally enable trust, in fact it continuously works against it, digital technologies rely upon added layers of controls to enable trust that is rapidly being destroyed by AI. Not because of the obvious headline-grabbing capabilities of LLMs to simplify attacks, but because of more subtle ways in which AI, and especially agentic AI, is changing the interaction model on which this machinery was built. The overwhelming majority of cybersecurity controls and defense mechanisms rely on the fundamental premise that the agent is a human. This includes identity assurances like multi-factor authentication, liveness checks, know your customer, biometric controls, but also defense mechanisms like rate limiting, CAPTCHAs, signature checks, anti-bot mechanisms, almost all of them. This wasn't a problem until now because we've been treating digital space as an amorphous tool, a medium to conduct business across distance. One real-world entity interacting with another real-world entity, and everything in between, the hundreds of physical, digital, and logical devices and processes facilitating that interaction, were simply part of the infrastructure. So the agent was a person, at least symbolically. For this type of interaction, credentials, with some compensating controls for added trust, did the job. But this is about to change. The transition from human agents to digital agents is dissolving the core tenet of most security controls, making them irrelevant. On the one hand, for example, the cybersecurity industry is pursuing 2FA as a solution to a multitude of problems, while on the other hand, enterprises are silently disabling 2FA in key places because it's incompatible with robotic process automation. The problem is not 2FA per se, not even the type of 2FA, which we know some are better than others. The problem is that 2FA, like most security measures, is fixing a problem that has moved on. Digital space is on the verge of going from this amorphous soup into a feature-rich space filled with interacting agents of various degrees of autonomy and intelligence. In a way, we're witnessing the birth of a synthetic society which will mix with our society, opening a new chapter of our civilization, where humans and machines, physical and virtual alike, will be interacting in socially meaningful ways like only people do today. Suddenly, we need to solve not only access control, but also ownership, delegation, trust, a multi-parameter function across multiple degrees of separation. A society, real or synthetic, needs trust. Members need to be able to tell who is safe to engage with and who is not. Credentials can't do it. They break trust, and agents break security measures. What we need is identity. Identity is a phenomenon that doesn't have to be exclusively human. Anything can have an identity, and so can machines. They don't even have to be AI. Identity transforms amorphous, undelineated tools into agents. This will, of course, have to be an artificial or synthetic identity, but one that reproduces in digital space the conditions that lead to identity of people in the real world. This powerful model shift from credential to identity, from describing the point of business to describing the agent of action, handles multi-peer social interactions in a natural way. Imagine an MCP server modeling access to some restricted content. In today's credential-based access control model, the content will be accessed through artifacts describing the account holding the content. Even in the most basic 1-degree separation scenario in which a human gives those credentials to an AI to access those resources, and I will discuss the implications of such practices in a future video, the MCP server is completely oblivious to any information about the acting AI. This information is simply not in the credential. The AI is just part of the soup. On the other hand, if the MCP server, or any other agent for that matter, were to decide access based on the identity of the requesting agent, we could have 1,000 intermediaries between the real-world user and the MCP server, and every single one of them would be accounted for in the transaction. All we need is non-repudiation between nodes, and the result is end-to-end chain of trust, no matter how long or complex the interaction path is, making a synthetic society as fluid and self-reinforcing as a real-world society. In the real world, the prerequisites for identity come naturally. It is part of our existence, but in digital space we need to model it, like everything else. The 12 principles of agentic identity, linked below, serve as a set of non-functional requirements for identity to become a foundational property of digital space. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and subscribe to get notified. In my next video, I will start walking through how each principle maps between reality and digital space to create identity parity and build the trust AI needs to be part of our society. Thanks for watching.